Tonight, as stock prices soar, protests against corporate greed spread from Wall Street to streets all over America. Reports from Jim Axelrod and Anthony Mason. Funerals for protesters in Egypt after the deadliest violence there since the Arab Spring. Jan Crawford on Mitt Romney as his Mormon religion becomes an issue in the presidential campaign. And in what was supposed to be their golden years, many seniors depend on the government for food, but some could soon be cut off.
I can think of things that Congress could probably cut back on. This is not one of them. People have to eat.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Scott is off. I'm Norah O'Donnell, and we begin tonight with Wall Street rallies, the one on the stock exchange and the others out on the streets. The Dow closed up 330 points today, or 3%, continuing a run-up that began last week. At the same time, a new report says Americans are seeing their incomes fall even more rapidly than during the recession. Incomes are down 6.7% since the recession ended, after falling just half that amount during the recession. And that's one reason for the protests that began on Wall Street are now spreading across the country, from Honolulu to Boston, San Francisco to Miami, 67 cities in 33 states. Jim Axelrod is in downtown Manhattan. Jim?
Well, Norah, New York's Mayor Michael Bloomberg now says the protesters can stay here indefinitely as long as no laws are broken. That is as clear as he's been so far, that the demonstrations will be able to continue unimpeded.
The Occupy Wall Street protesters have set up a camp with a food court, newspaper, medical unit, internet cafe,
yoga class, 10 minutes,
even yoga practice. But uniting behind one clear, cohesive message, that's a different story. Do you need a unified message?
No, we do not need a unified message.
28-year-old Max Hodes has been here at Zuccotti Park for 23 straight days.
I think that tool you're talking about, the one specific message, is a way to dumb down and divide the masses.
While long on moral outrage, this movement remains short on specifics and absent a disciplined approach to convert dozens of demonstrations nationwide into a lasting political movement.
Is there a specific law you'd like to see passed?
No. No.
You're in a struggle here.
Yes.
What would victory in the struggle look like?
Victory is not going to be a simple, easy to define picture.
For Buddy Bolton, out of work for 18 months, victory is reducing the influence of lobbyists. For Sparrow Kennedy, it's higher taxes on the top 1% of earners to the benefit of the other 99.
I'm not saying let's make these people less wealthy, but I'm saying let's use a little of this wealth to give people the basic necessities: food, clothing, and shelter.
Younger protesters here argue their movement is still in its infancy. They're not following someone else's schedule to define themselves. But older demonstrators who lived through the 60s sense further delay could risk their momentum.
We do need one message. Now, what that message is, that is the question.
Now, tomorrow afternoon, a crowd of between 400 and 800 Occupy Wall Street protesters say they're going to leave here and march uptown to the homes of some of New York's wealthiest residents. Men like Rupert Murdoch, the CEO of Fox, or Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. They say there they'll protest tax policies which they say unfairly aid the rich. Norah?
Jim, I know you said the mayor says the protesters can stay as long as they want. How long is that likely to be?
Well, the mayor said that he thinks that'll be determined by the weather, which suggests the city's position is, with winter coming, they're content to wait out the demonstrators.
All right, Jim Axelrod, thank you. And the rally in stock prices has seen the Dow gain 777 points in the past week, more than 7%. Anthony Mason is our senior business correspondent. And Anthony, What's behind this rally?
Well, Norah, this was the Dow's biggest rally in 2 months, and it was fueled by new optimism that Europe is finally getting a grip on its debt crisis. France and Germany agreed over the weekend to come up with a plan to strengthen European banks by early November. So, after dipping into bear territory last Monday, that's a decline of 20% from its highs, the S&P 500 has now rallied back more than 10% in just a week, and all 30 stocks in the Dow, Norah, were up today.
Pretty incredible. So do you think the rally can last?
Well, this market is still very volatile, Norah. This was the 10th triple-digit move in the Dow in the past 11 sessions. We've had some good economic news, like last Friday's job number, better than expected. So fears of a recession easing somewhat, but they haven't gone away.
Anthony Mason, thank you so much. And in Egypt today, Christian leaders blame the military for yesterday's deadly violence, the worst since protesters toppled President Hosni Mubarak in February. Mark Phillips reports at least 26 people were killed in the streets of Cairo, most of them Christians.
The hostilities and suspicions in Egypt don't even stop to bury the dead. While some of the victims of Sunday's violence were laid to rest, the families of others refused to allow funerals, demanding instead that autopsies be performed to prove how their relatives were killed. There's even a dispute over that. There are two versions of what happened in the riots. Members of Egypt's Coptic Christian minority, about 10% of the population, insist they had been marching peacefully to protest what they see as increasing discrimination when they were attacked, first by rock-throwing thugs, then by the army firing live rounds and charging through the crowd in armored vehicles. The army says it was attacked by violent infiltrators in the crowd and fought back. Egyptian state TV cast the Christian demonstrators as a violent mob. Egyptian Prime Minister Essam Sharaf warned of what he called foreign meddling and a dirty conspiracy. And the army is being accused of inciting violence to remain in power. This is supposed to be the period when post-Mubarak Egypt moves towards a new order and democracy, but there's little evidence of either. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
In Libya, the former rebels raised their flag today over Convention Center in Muammar Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. But the battle is still raging block by block, house by house, as pro-Gaddafi forces seem ready to fight to the last man. Alan Pizzi is there.
The last Gaddafi loyalists holding out in his hometown are being mercilessly ground down as the latest final assault gains brutal momentum. An almost ceaseless attack using rockets, mortars, and heavy machine guns has moved the front lines forward more in the last 2 days than even the attackers expected. But with nowhere to run and no reason to expect mercy, the hardcore of what's left of Gaddafi's forces aren't giving up ground easily. Reinforcements of former rebels in their Mad Max vehicles charge through the gap in the protective wall to head for the front lines, spurred on by the scent of victory and a cry that is both call to arms and prayer. Prayers they feel are answered when comrades in arms meet, joyful that each has survived to fight on. Abdurraouf Sadi, an oil field engineer turned fighter, says he had no choice but to be here.
This is the price for the freedom. We never know the freedom before.
By the time the prize of Sirte is finally won, there's not likely to be much left there that's worth having. But for the men fighting for it, the value of Sirte is not material, it's psychological. Its fall will mean the actual end of Gaddafi. Not everyone in Gaddafi's birthplace was loyal to him. But the fighters who now control the rubble are jumpy, fearful that snipers may still be hiding here. The assault on the last bastion seems designed to make sure that none survive. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Sirte.
The United Nations today accused the police in Afghanistan of systematically torturing prisoners. It says suspected Taliban fighters were hung by their hands and beaten with cables until they confessed. The UN report comes as the U.S. military transfers more authority to Afghan security forces. NATO says it's taking action to stop abuses. Mitt Romney tries to ignore the controversy over his religion. Dr. John LaPook on why the price of one of the most popular prescription drugs is suddenly rising. And the tipster who blew the whistle on fugitive mobster Whitey Bulger when the CBS Evening News continues. The Republican presidential candidates face off in their next debate tomorrow evening at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. The focus will be on the economy. But another issue has suddenly popped up in the 2012 campaign, the religion of the frontrunner. Political correspondent Jan Crawford has the latest on that.
Mitt Romney, campaigning today in New Hampshire, kept his focus on the economy.
The Obama economy is a Where's Waldo economy.
And ignored a growing issue, his Mormon faith. It boiled up at a conference of religious conservatives when a pastor of a Dallas megachurch who supports Texas Governor Rick Perry said Romney was not a real Christian.
In my estimation, Mormonism is a cult, and it would give credence to a cult to have a Mormon candidate.
The other Republican candidates disavowed the remarks.
We're not running for theologian-in-chief. We're running for President of the United States of America.
This is so inconsequential as far as this campaign is concerned.
But Perry has had relatively little to say about Jeffress.
Governor, is Mormonism a cult?
The other Mormon candidate in the race, former Utah Governor John Huntsman, said today on CNN that Perry should be more outspoken.
Anyone who is associated with somebody willing to make those comments ought to stand up and distance themselves in very bold language. And that hasn't been done. And Rick ought to stand up and do that.
For Perry, who is depending on the religious vote, the issue is complicated. In the 2008 Republican race, evangelical voters were a solid majority in two key early states, Iowa and South Carolina. By contrast, in New Hampshire, where Romney has a commanding lead, evangelicals made up only 21% of 2008 Republican primary voters.
And many evangelicals want a candidate who shares their religious beliefs. So Perry's got to be careful here, Norah. While he may disagree, he doesn't want to rebuke the same voters he'll be counting on if he's got a shot of winning the nomination.
It's a great point, Jan Crawford. Thanks so much. And now it can be told. The tip that led to the arrest of gangster Whitey Bulger in June came from this woman. Anna Bjorn's daughter, a former Miss Iceland, lived part-time in Santa Monica, California, where every morning she saw Bulger and his girlfriend feeding a stray cat. On a trip back to Iceland, she saw a news report about Bulger and phoned the FBI. For that, she collected a $2 million reward. A popular drug for treating inflammation is giving patients sticker shock. Why the pills suddenly cost 50 times more. More than half of American adults take dietary supplements, but a study out today suggests older women may face a slightly greater risk of death if they take multivitamins or some mineral supplements. Now, researchers say they don't know why, and they found no direct link between these supplements and any health problems, but this study in the Archives of Internal Medicine will certainly add to questions about whether healthy people need to take them at all. One of the most popular treatments for gout and other inflammatory conditions is a prescription drug called colchicine. It dates back to ancient Greece and is taken by nearly 4 million Americans. But in recent months, the price shot up almost 5,000%. Dr. John LaPook explains why.
24-year-old Scott McGrath suffers from a painfully inflamed lining of the heart. 4 months ago, the price of his medication suddenly went through the ceiling. Have a look at his old and new prescriptions.
This is for 60 tablets of colchicine. How much did it cost?
It cost me $34.83, and it cost my insurance company nothing.
And then when you went to refill it, it's now called?
It's now called Colchris, and it cost me $62.16, so almost double the amount that I paid, and it cost my insurance company $244.74.
A jump of $272.
The drug is no longer being sold by any company other than a single company, and that explains the price increase.
But colchicine has been used to treat gout and other inflammatory conditions for thousands of years. How could one company gain a monopoly? There are about 1,000 medications on the market that predate the existence of the FDA and therefore were never approved. FDA official Deborah Otter spoke to us as the head of the Office of Unapproved Drugs.
Well, for me, unapproved drugs present just present risks. We don't know what's in them. We don't know if they're going to work properly. We don't know how they're made. And that's a real concern.
Hundreds of thousands of people take colchicine each year. The FDA told us over the past 40 years, 169 deaths have been linked to the medication. A company called URL Pharma decided it would take the ancient drug, sold for 10 cents a pill, and test it as part of an FDA program to either approve these drugs or get them off the market.
One company chose to seek FDA approval, and they spent tens of millions of dollars in order to establish the data necessary for that approval. And actually, there were some important things that came out of the approval process. We discovered that a lot of people were being excessively dosed with colchicine.
Unlike companies that develop drugs from scratch and study thousands of patients for years, URL Pharma started with a pre-existing drug. Its research did clarify safety and dosing information. In return for the studies, the FDA granted URL exclusive rights to sell the medication.
The FDA rewarded them.
Dr. Edward Fuddman is a rheumatologist who's been prescribing colchicine for 30 years.
The reward that they got seems far out of proportion to the work that they did.
What were the conversations among your colleagues?
Outrage, basically. It was just outrage that a company could take advantage of this FDA process and basically appropriate the drug for its own purpose. Even if a patient's not paying the full price out of pocket, their insurance company is paying it. Medicare and Medicaid have to pay for it. We're all paying for it.
How much are we paying? URL declined to tell us about its sales, so we went to a drug benefits manager called Prime Therapeutics. It told us the cost of an average 23-day prescription, including pharmacy charges, has risen from under $7 to $185. IMS Health gave us the number of colchicine prescriptions nationwide. Add it all up, and the cost of URL's price hike over just 1 year could exceed $500 million. With the higher price, URL has started a program to assist patients who can't pay. So far, 60,000 have asked for help. URL declined our request for an interview, but in a statement said its research, quote, dramatically reduced adverse reactions from colchicine. We asked Deborah Otter of the FDA about the price.
Did you anticipate that the pricing was going to go up 50 times?
I think that the companies have control over the pricing, and we certainly would hope that they would take into account the interests of consumers and not price them unreasonably.
Does that mean no? You weren't expecting it?
I think that's their decision. I think we were surprised that they set the price that high, yes.
So you're back to running now? Scott McGrath tried over-the-counter medications for his heart condition, but they didn't work as well as colchicine.
I mean, it's scary. It's a scary position to be in, to find myself in. But you know, ultimately, I had to pay because I needed the drug.
URL's exclusive right to colchicine for the most common indication, gout, expires next July. There are about 1,000 other unapproved medications currently on the market. Since the FDA does not control drug pricing, there's little to stop similar price hikes from happening again.
All right, John, thank you for that. And childbirth sometimes involves a race to the hospital, but a marathon? 27-year-old Amber Miller, 39 weeks pregnant, got her doctor's permission to compete in yesterday's Chicago Marathon. Walking and running, she finished in 6 hours, 25 minutes. And later that evening gave birth to a daughter, June, 7 pounds, 13 ounces. By the way, Miller finished the marathon ahead of her husband. She says he was a little out of shape. Many older Americans depend on government food aid, but some are at risk of losing it. That story is next. Finally tonight, bread lines and soup kitchens conjure up images of the Great Depression, when so many Americans were out of work and hungry. But all these years later, in today's struggling economy, many Americans are again dependent on food aid, especially, as Seth Doan reports, the elderly.
You're all set. All right, thanks a lot. Welcome.
Every month, 68-year-old David Coleman comes to the lobby of his New Jersey low-income housing complex to pick up a box of 20 non-perishable food items worth about $50.
This is not grocery shopping, but this is something that really helps.
He's one of 600,000 seniors nationwide who take part in what's called the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. To qualify, they must earn less than $14,300 a year. But this program is in jeopardy.
Congress is looking at cutting some of the funding to this program.
I can think of things that Congress could probably cut back on, but this is not one of them. People have to eat.
In the latest federal budget, the House proposed $800 million in cuts to federal nutrition programs. If those cuts pass Congress later this year, 150,000 food box recipients would be dropped.
I ask you, how would you make a decision around which elderly person gets a food box, who gets one and who doesn't? How do you make those kinds of decisions?
Vicki Esquerra runs Feeding America, which provides emergency food aid to 200 food banks nationwide.
We cannot do this by ourselves. We have got to have support on these federal programs, and Congress has got to step up.
A lot of canned items. Are most of these things from food banks?
A lot of them are.
A third of those who use a food bank at least once a month are over the age of 60.
How is retirement?
Financially speaking, it's a strain. It really is.
With gas prices up 30% and groceries up 6%, it seems the only thing staying steady is Coleman's fixed income, just $1,000 a month from Social Security.
We are the backbone of the country. We helped to build this country. And if we put in our 40, 50 years of work and hard work in this country, then, don't just turn your back on us and throw us out the pasture and say you're on your own.
Most here retired years ago. Going back to work isn't an option, but neither is going hungry.
Thank you very much.
Seth Doan, CBS News, Plainfield, New Jersey.
That's the CBS Evening News for tonight. Scott will be back tomorrow. I'm Norah O'Donnell. Thanks for joining us, and have a good night.